May I approach?
Yes.
I'm showing you a photograph,
Okay.
and could you tell us what you see?
That's my son?
Thank you. May I introduce this as an exhibit?
Yes.
Hi, Crime Junkie jurors, and thank you for joining me. Today, court has wrapped up. This is day 2 of Karen Reed's second trial. Now, today we got to hear from 4 witnesses, and I wanted to give y'all a recap and point out some things that really kind of stood out to me from court today. So before we get started on that, quick update on the Arca voir dire. Now, this was actually rescheduled. This will now happen on Monday afternoon. So the jury will have a half day on Friday and a half day on Monday so they can bring the Arca experts back in and see if we can get all of these discovery issues figured out so that we can get ready for their testimony. Now, Carrie Roberts took the stand again today at the very start of the day. She continued her direct examination by Hank Brennan for the prosecution. Now, Brennan showed the jury a ring video of the 3 women getting out of the car at John's house when they went to look for him. Now, here's the thing about the ring video. There is no ring footage of Karen showing the broken taillight to Carrie and Jen McCabe. Now, this becomes a little bit of an issue later. They talk about it. Jackson actually points out that Carrie's memory of them doing this in the driveway is a little bit faulty because she thought that this happened when they got there, but they didn't. So she admits that it must have been when they left. But there's no video of them leaving. That one is missing. So they talk about that a little bit on cross-examination as well. Now, they also showed Carrie a photo of Karen's broken taillight and asked her some questions about this. So Carrie said that Karen had pointed out this broken taillight, and Carrie described what that taillight looked like when she saw it that morning. She said that Karen asked her when she was talking about this, do you think I hit him? And Carrie said that she told her no, she didn't want to point the fingers at anybody, which is something she said a couple times. Now, Carrie also described the scene when they arrived at 34 Fairview Road. She said that John was, quote unquote, covered in snow. She said that she called John's parents about him being in the accident. And she said that she picked up John's phone once they moved him onto the stretcher. She says that she put it in her pocket, so she kind of carried it around with her in her pocket for a while before she eventually gave it to a first responder. So Brennan played the entire dash cam footage from when Carrie was there that morning. He would stop kind of at certain times and pause it. Now, I know that there was some confusion about this and like his motive behind this, why he was doing this. But the times that Brennan paused and asked questions were all significant times in the timeline for certain reasons. For example, he stopped at the time when the Google search was being made that morning, and he stopped at the times when John's phone started and stopped registering steps. So that kind of shows that it was still in Carrie's pocket at that time. Now, Carrie also gave an account of what happened at the hospital. She says that Mrs. O'Keefe told her that John was gone. She said that she went in to view John O'Keefe's body, and before she left, she says that she got the blue bracelet from his wrist, and Mrs. O'Keefe still wears that to this day. Now, Brennan shows a photo of John O'Keefe's body to Carrie while she's on the stand, and she gets very emotional. She breaks down and she begins to cry. Now, after the loss of John, Carrie said that she formed a bond with Jen McCabe and they became friends. And this is brought up a lot as well in cross-examination, which was handled by Alan Jackson. So Jackson started by asking how many times Carrie has met with or talked to someone from the district attorney's office. Her estimate was somewhere around 50 times. She says that she would ask them questions, and sometimes Jen would reach out to Carrie and have Carrie ask questions on her behalf. Now, Jen asked Carrie to reach out to the DA. She said maybe about 4 times. So she would do that and then she would report back to Jen. Now, he also asked if she had met specifically with Brennan, and she said yes, going over testimony from the last trial within a couple weeks at the DA's office. Was she shown anything? Yes, transcripts from the last trial. So that was a big oops moment. Counsel goes to sidebar at this point because the jury isn't actually supposed to know that there was a last trial. So it's not good for them to hear that. It's not good for their minds to wander about why there was a previous trial and what that may or may not mean. So Jackson also asked some questions about the same dash cam footage that Brennan had showed and about the injuries that Carrie had observed on John, both at the scene and at the hospital. So while they were at the scene, she said that she saw a hematoma over John's right eye and there was blood around his nostril. Now, by the time they got to the hospital, she said that both of his eyes were swollen and his left eye was black. He had scratches on his right arm and lacerations under his eyebrow. One of Jackson's biggest lines of questioning was surrounding the 6 interactions that Carrie Roberts had with law enforcement following this incident. Now, this is pretty interesting, and it's around the 2-hour and 45-minute mark in today's live stream that this all begins. So if you want to check that out, it's pretty interesting. And I also have the live stream broken up into chapters so that everything is much easier to find. The first time that Carrie talks to anybody, Carrie is first questioned by police officers while she's on scene. Now, at this time, she doesn't mention anything about Karen Reed saying anything to her about this cracked tail light. She says later to Brennan when he goes back to question her about this again that she didn't want to point any fingers. Now, she's also interviewed later that night in her own home. And Jackson asked her some questions about this, about her being in contact with Jen McCabe that day and even during that interview. Now, Carrie said that she did speak to Jen McCabe pretty much that whole day, but she didn't recall texting her during that interview. Now, also during this interview, Jackson wanted to know if the interviewers cut her off. She said no, she was allowed to provide as much information as she wanted. But during this time, Carrie did not say that Karen had called at 5 a.m. saying he's dead, nor did she add anything about the taillight or about hearing about the Google search. None of that was mentioned at this time. So fast forward a couple days, the next interview is actually done while Carrie is at Jen McCabe's house. So Carrie and Jen actually met up before this interview was done. They're at Jen McCabe's house, and they were putting together a timeline of the events at the request of Mrs. O'Keefe, John's mom. So now there's this collaborative timeline of events, and Jackson wants to know if and how that timeline that they put together could have influenced Carrie's own memory, because this time around, her recollection of what happened seemed to change according to what she was telling law enforcement. So Jackson asked Carrie if she was aware of text messages that Jen sent others in a group chat while she's in her interview. Now, these texts are telling them, Carrie is telling them everything. So he's kind of suggesting that Jen was listening in on that interview that was happening at her house between Carrie and law enforcement. But Carrie said that she was not aware of any of those texts. Now there's the next interaction, which is a phone interview or conversation on that same day with Trooper Michael Proctor. Now, Carrie is also at Jen McCabe's house when this happens, but she says that she went into a different room and she had called him because she said she wanted to talk to him. She had remembered some things. And then she also talked to police on February 2nd. This is the time when she handed over her phone, signed a consent form for them to do a search on it. Now, she was also with Jen McCabe at that time and the next time when she testified at the grand jury. Okay, so here's the thing with the grand jury testimony. When Carrie Roberts went to testify at the grand jury. She was testifying under oath. Now, in the room with her before she went to give her testimony was, again, Jen McCabe and Jen's husband, Matt McCabe. So while she's testifying, Lally actually asks her if she heard anything that was said from Karen Reed to Jen McCabe while they were sitting in the police cruisers outside of 34 Fairview when the police had arrived. So Carrie testified that Karen had asked Jen McCabe to Google hypothermia. And this is the whole how long to die in the cold search. Now, remember, Jen McCabe's version of events has always been that the reason she Googled it was Googling it that morning because Karen Reed had asked her to. So when Lally asked her about this, that was the testimony that Carrie gave. So here's the problem with this. Later, at the next time she testifies at a grand jury, it's the federal grand jury. And at this point, she is asked if she heard that statement because she had just testified to this at the grand jury before. At this time, she says she did not hear it. That was a big part of the cross-examination here because Jackson asked if someone told her that she needed to say that. Carrie said nobody told her to say that. Somebody just told her that it was said. So Jackson points out that the question that Lally asked at the grand jury was what she heard. And he says, so what you told the grand jurors was false. Now, Jackson asked Carrie if she understood the importance of providing accurate information to law enforcement and without outside influence. And she said yes. So the theme of the questioning here continues to kind of go back to the influence that Jen McCabe may or may not have had on Carrie's testimony. And Jackson brings that up a lot as he's walking through these interactions with police. And then comes the boots. So this was brought up in the first trial. I got annoyed then. It was brought up today. I got annoyed today. Here's the thing with the boots. The three women who were going to look for John O'Keefe that morning, Jen McCabe, Carrie Roberts, and Karen Reed, all go to John O'Keefe's house as they're looking to find him. When they get to John O'Keefe's house, prosecution asks Carrie Roberts what happened. And she says that they stopped and she and Jen took off their boots. They had to take off their shoes to go into John's house. It was a rule. Apparently, Karen did not take off her boots. This has been brought up in both trials, kind of suggesting that it is in some way evidence against Karen Reed. But as many times as witnesses have used the word hysterical to describe Karen in those hours, I don't think that anyone is surprised that she wasn't thinking about removing her shoes at the door as they're trying to find John. But the prosecution brought this up in both trials as evidence in some way. So the next witness to come up was Peggy O'Keefe. Now, this is John's mother. This was a relatively short but emotional testimony. There were kind of two parts to this one. One was this emotional part that was centered around John and the loss that she experienced from his passing. And the other one kind of gave us some insight into her account of what happened and some insight into her thoughts on Karen. Now, when she saw Karen at the hospital, she said that she asked the nurse, what is she doing here? And when she actually got close to Karen at the hospital, she said that she asked her what happened. And Karen said that she had left John O'Keefe at a party. Mrs. O'Keefe said, you just left him there? Also, when they left the hospital, Mrs. O'Keefe said that Karen and her dad came to John's house where they were. And she says that Karen and her dad went upstairs for about 10 to 15 minutes. And Mrs. O'Keefe says that she didn't know what they got up there or what they did. And she said that she never should have let them go up there. Now, other than that, she doesn't really remember talking to Karen while she was there. So that's pretty much the end of that one. Now, the defense attorney, Alan Jackson, gets up and he gives his condolences for Mrs. O'Keefe's loss, but he does not cross-examine her. The next witness called to the stand is Trooper Nicholas Guarino from Massachusetts State Police. This was fairly short, but it won't be the last we hear from him. They did some questions regarding cell phone data. He says that once they received John O'Keefe's phone, it was plugged into the software. They did the downloads. It was kept in a locked evidence room. Now, we didn't hear much about this today, but Guarino will be brought back to testify again when it's time to read the text from John O'Keefe's phone. The final witness of the day is Daniel Whitley from Canton Fire Department. He described arriving to the scene. He was actually called there to assist Karen for a Section 12 because Karen had made some statements about ending her own life. Now, on the way to the hospital, he said that Karen had asked him several times if there was any chance that John O'Keefe could be alive. He says he tried to console her and to give her some hope that John O'Keefe could be alive. Now, one thing that was kind of interesting. So Whitley was asked about kind of how Karen behaved in the ambulance and her demeanor. He says that Karen's demeanor changed when he mentioned Carrie Roberts. So Whitley actually knows Carrie Roberts. They're kind of neighbors. He took the fire truck over there to a block party that she throws. So he says that they're not really friends, but they do know each other. He considers them more acquaintances. So he says that when he mentioned to Karen Reed that she has a good support system, that Karen Reed said, "Do you know Carrie Roberts?" And he says, yes. And he said, "If you really knew Carrie Roberts, you wouldn't be saying that." Now, he talked about this interaction in the last trial, and he referred to it as snarky. As soon as he said snarky, there was an objection. It was stricken from the record. Pretty much the exact same thing happened this year, but this time, instead of saying it was snarky, he called it bizarre. Again, objection, struck from the record. But other than that, was almost verbatim to what was said last year. So there was a cross-examination that was done by David Yannetti where they talked to him about trying to get the medical history of Karen Reed. Now, Yannetti then asked about the patient care report. He kind of talked about the boxes to fill out and about the primary impression. He wrote about the behavioral psych episode, and he asked about snarkiness and if there was a box or a place to put snarkiness on this report. So you'll be happy to know that there is not a place for snark listed on the hospital reports anywhere. So that was the end of that one. Now, the jurors were dismissed today around 4. Whitley was not finished. He will be brought back tomorrow for the rest of his cross-examination and then potentially redirect on the stand so that we can see what else he can tell us about everything. Now, that's who we heard from today. So here's my 2 biggest takeaways of the day. The first one is definitely Mrs. O'Keefe. Her testimony was heartbreaking. She testified about the loss of John O'Keefe and the loss of her daughter. No matter whose side you're on, if you are on one side or the other or somewhere in between, this was heartbreaking testimony. And it's a true reminder of what this case is actually about and a reminder that this family is truly grieving. So that was really impactful. The other takeaway from today is really just the evolution of testimonies, and the defense is hammering down hard on this. As time progresses, the testimony seems to be progressing a little bit too, and the defense is using every chance they get to point out the evolution of testimonies, the changing of statements, and faulty memories. This is going to be very important for their case in chief when it's their time to get up. So they're picking these holes as much as they can, and that's one of their main themes that they tend to go with. So that's the end of day 2. Let me know in comments what stood out to you. What was the biggest day for you? What was the thing that drove you nuts? What was the thing that impacted you the most? I want to hear all of your thoughts on this because today was, of course, a very big day. Now, we'll be back tomorrow live bright and early for day 3 right here on Crime Junkie Jury. So make sure to hit the notification so that you get notified as soon as we go live. And I will see y'all for jury duty back here tomorrow morning.